Now we can start the computer and see what happens. And for starter, what we can see what happens is that it doesn't recognize the CD-ROM drive. And what can we see in the BIOS is that it indeed doesn't recognize the CD-ROM drive, which should be in the secondary master. But we are going to check the rest of the configuration now that I am here. We can see that it is recognizing the CPU as 233 megahertz, which means that the overclock is working properly. In the first part of the video, I did set the board to use the 3.5 ratio. But the rest of the configuration is okay, so let's turn it off and see what's wrong. And this is the problem. Do you remember how I mentioned that those cables are very easy to plug them wrong? Well, that's just what happened. I clearly missed a row of pins, so let's just plug in properly and it should work. Well, the computer refused to start from the CD-ROM, despite the BIOS having the option to boot from it. So I'm going to need to use an alternative way to install Windows 2000. Fortunately, it was designed in a time in which a lot of computers still couldn't boot from CD-ROM, so it includes an utility to create a set of setup floppy disks. And I already have one of those sets since it's not the first time I have to resort to this. So I'm going to restart the computer, configure the BIOS so it boots from the floppy drive, and then proceed to install Windows 2000 from the floppy disks. You can see how complex can be something that on paper should be extremely easy, like reinstalling Windows. Nowadays you would only insert the CD, boot from the CD or from an USB drive, and just run the installer from there. This setup, however, doesn't really have any difference from booting the setup from the CD. The only thing the utilities does is creating those floppies, which do exactly the same as the start of the setup, which is loading the installer on the memory. The installer and the drivers it needs to work. So if you have never seen a Windows 2000 install before, there's no real difference from a CD install, except that it will be significantly slower and will be getting prompts from time to time to change the floppy. The part which requires the floppies is now done. It has taken like 11 minutes, which is like 4 times longer than the usual 2-3 minutes it should take in a computer like this. So now we can continue in a perfectly normal way, like if we had started it from the CD. The floppies are no longer necessary. Here we have something which likely is a test install which I did on this card, so we are going to delete it. Now we are going to create a partition on the drive using the whole drive and hoping that it will work. Normally we would format on NTFS, but NTFS doesn't really like the logic that those kind of adapters use and will make the system work really slow. So we are going to use FAT instead. When I said before that installing on NTFS will make the system extremely slow, I meaning slow to the point that it would take to install like 10 to 12 hours, when normally it should take like 45 minutes to an hour on a computer of those specifications. So it is highly advisable to use FAT32 or FAT if you are installing Windows on a computer which uses an SD as main drive. In any case, NTFS also produces a bigger wear on the card than in that FAT32, so it is a good idea to avoid it anyways. This computer is an exceptional case because of having a CPU intended to work with 32-bit software. Normally on a computer this sold you like Windows 95 or Windows 98. And if you are restoring a computer modern enough So using Windows 2000 is the ideal OS for it. You'd likely be better using instead a SATA to IDE adapter and using a modern SATA drive. Mostly since if you are restoring a computer which is modern enough, so Windows 2000 is the ideal option, it will likely be a Pentium 2 or a newer machine. Those no longer have the restrictions on the size the computer can use. Unlike some older boards in which the computer might not even boot if the drive is much bigger than what the BIOS can direct. What the hell is that? Mm, well, okay, it's the first time in my life I see this error. Well, Don't install it. I'm pretty sure it is a network component I don't plan to use anyways. So the setup is finished. It has taken like 50 minutes, which is a very reasonable time for a computer like this. Now let's start Windows 2000 properly and start to do fun things with it. This thing it does that sometimes it gets apparently stuck. It is because it seems that it doesn't like the SD card anyways. So let's see if we can finish the test, or I'll have to swap it to a normal drive before this ends. At least we can be sure that the sound card is working properly. And it seems that the video card is working as well. That's easy to tell since we are seeing the screen on blue. If the drivers weren't working, we would see it on a quite ugly green. If we go to the device manager on the control panel, we can see that the system is apparently working properly, and we can see that there's no device which has a missing driver we have to install manually. However, I'm still going to update manually the sound card and video card drivers, since the ones Windows 2000 includes are quite basic. That's quite understandable since first the Sound Blaster Live is quite newer for Windows 2000. I'm even surprised that it even has built-in drivers. It might be something related with the Service Pack 4. And in the case of the video card, there's a newer controller than this one, since Matrox kept giving support to this card until 2003, if I'm not mistaken. So we have a newer driver available for this device. And now I have realized that all the USB ports are on the back, so I'm going to turn off the computer so I can get a more convenient port to plug in some USB sticks for the drivers. So let's turn it off. And here we can see a quite unusual screen on Windows 2000, which is the one which tells you when you can safely turn off your computer. This shouldn't be appearing, since this computer in theory should be able to turn off automatically, but for some reason it is not doing it. So the most convenient way is going to be removing the front of the case and getting the cable through the same hole the front lights and buttons use. And I'm going to connect it to this internal USB on the USB card, which doesn't really has any other utility. And now we only have to put back the front of the case in its place, preferably without turning on the computer like I just did. And as you can see here, we have a very convenient USB port to connect stuff.